There is a specific kind of burden that has no name, not grief. Grief was for things that were finished, not trauma. Trauma was for wounds that had not yet understood themselves. This was something else, the weight of a world that had already ended, carried forward, into a world that had not ended yet, but would, unless the people carrying the weight did something with what they knew that the first time they had not known. 3 children in 3 different places, in bodies that had not yet learned to walk, carrying everything. The fights, the losses, the specific terrible education of a world that had asked more than children should have been asked to give, and had taken it anyway, because the world did not ask, it simply took, and the taking did not stop until something stopped it. Yuji Itadori lay in a crib and ran through everything, Sukuna's fingers, all 20 of them. Architecture of a catastrophe, playing in his memory, like a film he had already seen, every frame, every moment, every person he had watched die in the specific detailed way that memories were detailed when the experiences that produced them had cost everything. Kenjaku's plan, Mahito, the culling games, the prison realm, all of it, present in the mind of someone who could not yet form words to describe what he was carrying. But who carried it anyway, in the specific way that certain things were carried, when the carrying was not a choice but a condition of still being present in the world, after everything that had tried to remove you from it. Across the city, Megumi Fushiguro lay in his own silence, and did what Megumi did when he had information that needed to become a plan. He built the plan, quietly, methodically, before he could properly form words, because Megumi had always understood that the time between knowing something and being able to act on what you knew was not wasted time, was the most important time, the time when everything that mattered got decided before the moment arrived. That required the decision to already be made, and Nobara Kujisaki, wherever she was, did the thing that Nobara always did when she had taken stock of a situation and found it insufficient. She decided that it was going to be different, this time, not as a hope, not as a wish, as a decision, the specific kind that did not require the universe's permission to be real. The years passed differently than the first time because the people living them were different, not in the ways that the world could see. They looked like children, behaved like children in most of the ways that children behaved, but underneath, in the training, in the choices, in the specific focused quality of how they spent the time that the first timeline had spent on things that turned out not to matter. They were not children, they were people who had already paid every price. The Jujutsu world charged and had been given the impossible gift of paying it again with the knowledge of what the paying actually bought. Yuji trained his body. Not the way the first timeline had trained it, not in the frantic reactive way of someone discovering what they were capable of as the situations arrived that demanded capability. He trained it deliberately with the specific knowledge of someone who remembered every gap, every moment where the body had not been what the moment needed, and had paid for the not being in ways that could not be taken back. He pushed until the line between what he was and what heavenly restriction produced was not a line but a question that his body answered differently every morning, with more than the morning before, not through any technique, not through any gift, through the specific grinding accumulation of someone who remembered what it had cost not to be ready and was not interested in paying that cost. A second time, Megumi tamed his Shikigami one by one. Earlier than any student his age should have been capable of, because he was not a student his age, was a sorcerer who happened to be a student his age with the full memory of what his Shikigami could become when the taming was complete, and the specific patience of someone who understood that the taming could not be rushed, could only be done correctly. Or done again, later, at greater cost. He let Gojo adopt him because he knew what Gojo's guardianship meant, what it unlocked, what it made available, that nothing else made available. In quite the same way, he said nothing about the rest of it, not yet. That conversation required the right moment, and the right moment had not yet arrived. Nobara trained her resonance technique with the full understanding of what it could do when pushed past the limits that the first timeline had never had the time to push past. Her control sharpened, her hand-to-hand improved. She became, in the years of quiet preparation, something that the first timeline's version of her had been becoming. When the first timeline had run out of time for the becoming to finish, she finished it. In this one, the day arrived when Megumi was sent to retrieve one of Sukuna's fingers. A routine assignment from Gojo's perspective, A mission Gojo trusted his student to handle. What Gojo did not know was that his student had been waiting for this specific moment for years. Had been counting toward it in the specific way that people counted toward things that were going to change everything. Once they arrived, Yuji found Megumi on the school rooftop. And for a moment, the careful patience of years of preparation simply broke. He moved forward, called him by name with the easy familiarity of someone who had stood beside this person. In every version of every worst moment that the world had produced and had come out the other side, still standing because this person was standing beside him, Megumi stopped. Looked at the face that should have been a stranger's face, and smiled, the genuine smile of someone who had been carrying something alone for a very long time and had just encountered someone else who was carrying the same thing. So you were reborn as well. The cursed spirits came, attracted by the finger, as they always came as they had come the first time. When the outcome had been different, when the outcome had required something catastrophic to resolve, Megumi summoned divine dog totality, and it tore through everything in a single instant. Clean, complete, the way things ended, when the person ending them had spent years building toward exactly this capability for exactly this moment. The finger was secured. And they stood in the aftermath, holding one of 20 cursed objects that held the single greatest threat to every living person on the planet, and faced, for the first time. In this timeline, the real problem, not the cursed spirits, not the immediate threat, the fundamental problem that all the preparation in the world had not yet solved. What to do about Sukuna? They knew the fingers could not be destroyed. They knew that Yuji had been born, already carrying one sealed inside him, Kenjaku's insurance, built into the design. Before any of this started, they knew the culling games were a mechanism to forcefully incarnate Sukuna when enough conditions were met. They knew that Megumi was the one-in-a-million vessel that Sukuna had been waiting for, the entire weight of what they were working against, present in the space between two people who had already lived through it once, and were standing in the early quiet of a timeline that had not yet become what it was going to become if they did not do something different from what had been done before. Yuji suggested the obvious answer. He eats the fingers, becomes the cage, the same logic as the first time. Megumi shut it down. Because he knew what that led to, had lived what that led to, had watched what Sukuna did, with access to Yuji's memories, to Yuji's knowledge of every player, every weakness, every strategic piece of a world that Sukuna, with that knowledge, became exponentially more dangerous within. We need a better plan, he said, and they both understood that the better plan was not something that was going to arrive in this moment, was something that was going to have to be built while the clock that they both knew was running kept running for now. They sharpened. Nobara arrived at Jujutsu High, and Yuji's entire carefully maintained composure almost collapsed. He moved forward. Megumi put a hand on his shoulder before he could. They could not assume she remembered, could not treat a hope as a certainty, not with something this important. They took her to a cafe, sat across from her, and Yuji stared. With an expression that she found immediately and deeply suspicious, she asked why he was staring. He told her she looked strange without her eye patch. Megumi put his face in his hand. And Nobara, who had never needed more than a moment to understand what she was looking at, understood. So you two idiots came back as well. They told her everything, all of it. And she confirmed what they had hoped. She was as strong as she had been. At the end of the first timeline, the years of private training had produced exactly what private training produced. When the person doing it knew exactly what they were training for, and why, and what it cost not to be ready when the moment arrived, and so the plan formed: gather the fingers. Without feeding them to Yuji, destroy Mahito, because Mahito was the cornerstone of Kenjaku's architecture, remove him, and the structure built around the culling games began to collapse. Before it was finished, they trained. Yuji and Nobara helped Megumi build strategies around each Shikigami, while Gojo guided Megumi's domain expansion with the specific investment of a teacher who did not yet know what his student was building toward, but who recognized genius in the specific way that Gojo recognized most things immediately and completely. Yuji practiced hitting the contours of the soul with the full understanding of what soul strikes actually were and what they could do when the understanding was complete. Rather than discovered midway through a fight that could not afford the discovery to take as long as discoveries took, the finger bearer mission arrived in the first timeline. This fight had proven how far beyond them the upper end of curses really was, had required Sukuna's intervention, had required the decision that killed Yuji in the specific way. That decisions killed people when the decisions were made under the specific pressure of running out of every other option. This time, Yuji took the lead, black flash after black flash. Not the desperate scrambling of someone discovering a technique in the middle of needing it, the controlled application of someone who had used this technique more times than they could count and had spent years making the using of it cleaner, more efficient, more reliable than the first timeline's version had ever had the time to make it. Megumi worked the perimeter, with Nobara using his Shikigami not as primary weapons but as a support system, disrupting the curse's movement patterns, creating the fractions of a second. That made the difference between a black flash connecting and missing. Nobara handled the people inside, saving as many as she could with the specific efficiency of someone who had learned. In the first timeline, what it cost to prioritize the wrong things in the moments that required absolute clarity about what actually mattered. The curse fell, the finger was retrieved. Gojo was proud in the specific way. That Gojo was proud, which contained within it the specific quality of someone who had expected something exceptional and had received something beyond what exceptional had previously contained. He offered them a break, they refused and asked the right questions. That led Gojo to mention a pattern that connected to a cursed presence that Nanami had been sent to investigate. They asked to shadow Nanami. Gojo agreed because 3 students pushing aggressively toward experience was something he read as exactly what it appeared to be rather than what it actually was, which was 3 people who already knew what was coming and were positioning themselves to be where they needed to be. When it arrived, Junpei, they found him before Mahito found him in the specific sense of arriving first at the place where someone important was about to be shaped into something by whoever arrived first. They arrived first. They told him the truth about Mahito, all of it without softening, without the specific careful management of information that people did when they were not sure how much truth the person receiving it could hold. They had learned. In the first timeline, that underestimating what people could hold was its own kind of failure, its own kind of damage. Junpei did not believe them at first because belief in things that dismantled everything you had organized, your understanding of the world around, did not come immediately, even when the evidence was there. Then Nobara arrived. Finger in hand, curses streaming in behind her. The group dispatched them in seconds. Junpei watched them work, watched the thing they had told him would come exactly when they said it would, and looked at the finger, and looked at them, and understood with the specific clarity of someone who had just watched the truth demonstrate itself. That the person he had trusted had been engineering his life toward a specific ending. That was not his ending, was Mahito's. Furious, he asked what he needed to do. The plan was complicated, required Junpei to walk back into Mahito's orbit, knowing what Mahito was, to perform the role of a grieving, vengeful boy being shaped into a weapon, while being something else entirely. On the inside, it required a binding vow at the critical moment, one that would strip the lethal potential from his Shikigami's venom and convert it into something that paralyzed rather than ended. He agreed because the alternative was the version that the first timeline had produced, and he had just been told exactly what that version had looked like. The school incident unfolded almost like the first time, the controlled chaos, the students falling, the appearance of everything going exactly the way Mahito had designed. And then Yuji arrived, and Mahito, who had been holding a finger, tried to leverage Yuji into a binding vow, the same lever, the same threat, the same specific cruelty of someone who had learned to use what people loved as the instrument of their compliance. Yuji hit him before he finished the sentence and sent him across the hallway with the specific force of someone who had been waiting for this specific moment for a very long time. Mahito smiled, shouted that Yuji couldn't hurt him, and felt the damage that the punch had made in the place where damage like that was made, not the body, the soul, his own. He understood with the specific cold clarity of someone whose fundamental advantage had just been revealed as insufficient against this specific opponent. He took the fight outside and found Megumi and Nobara already positioned, as if they had been waiting, as if they had known because they had. He moved on Yuji because Yuji was the threat. He understood the mistake was assuming that Yuji was the only one Megumi's Shikigami collapsed the space around Mahito's movement, forcing him through corridors where Yuji's black flashes could land cleanly. Then Yuji drew a blade and severed one of Mahito's arms. Mid-fight, clean, deliberate, and sent it directly to Nobara, who was waiting for it, had been waiting for it, since before the fight began. Resonance activated on contact, and Mahito felt it through his entire existence, through every version of himself that existed in every soul he had ever touched and understood. With the absolute certainty of something encountering its own ending for the first time, that he had walked into a trap that had been built specifically for him by people who had already survived his first attempt to end them with no escape. He opened his domain for the first time, the last gamble of something that had run out of other options. And then 2 words that changed everything: domain expansion. Chimera Shadow Garden. Mahito's eyes widened as Megumi's domain destroyed his own in the specific way that things were destroyed, when the thing destroying them had been built to destroy exactly them, with everything that Megumi had in a lifetime and a half of building toward this. Mahito was gone, and with him, the cornerstone of Kenjaku's architecture cracked at its foundation. They went to Gojo and told him everything, not just the immediate. Not just the situation, all of it, the body-stealing sorcerer, wearing Gito's face, the full scope of what Kenjaku had been building, every detail carried forward from the previous timeline, where the not knowing had cost everything and everyone. They told him as if they had heard it from Mahito himself, which was, in a way, the truth. Gojo listened in the specific way that Gojo listened, which was completely and without the performance of listening that most people offered when they were actually waiting to respond. He heard everything and understood the problem and what the problem required. The strongest sorcerer alive went hunting. Kenjaku did not survive the encounter. Neither did the remaining disaster curses. They fell, not because Gojo was simply stronger, but because Gojo, with complete information, and no prison realm waiting for him, in the hands of someone he trusted, was something that the first timeline had never been able to produce. Gojo, fully present, fully informed, fully available to the world that needed him. Peace arrived, for a while, the fragile specific peace of a world that had been pulled back from the edge of something it had not fully seen coming, and was now sitting with the specific complicated quality of something that had almost been something else and wasn't, but the fingers still existed, 19 of them, gathered, secured, locked away but present in the specific way that problems were present when they had been addressed but not ended, and they all knew that as long as the fingers existed, Sukuna, the king of curses, was always a possibility. They brought the final plan to Gojo. Yuji eats the fingers, all 19, surrenders control deliberately, willingly. Gives Sukuna the opening to fully incarnate, because they need Sukuna out in the open, fully manifested, where he can be fought, where he can be ended, in the specific complete way that the first timeline had never managed. What Sukuna did not know was what was waiting for him. When he arrived, he opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was Gojo Satoru, smiling in the specific way that Gojo smiled when the situation was exactly what he wanted it to be. They fought, domain after domain, the 2 most powerful beings of their respective categories, occupying the same battlefield for the first time, without the specific interference of everything that the first timeline had arranged to prevent this meeting from happening on terms that anyone other than Kenjaku could benefit from. Sukuna was a genius in the specific way that 1,000 years of being the most dangerous thing in any room produced genius. His open domain was a genuine threat even to Gojo, but Gojo played it safe, baiting, teleporting, refusing the fight that Sukuna wanted, the direct confrontation where raw power could decide things cleanly. Sukuna was furious. How can the strongest sorcerer of the modern era not face me head-on, he asked. Gojo smiled. I am not facing you, I am buying time. For him, Sukuna turned and saw Mahoraga and understood for the first time in his existence what it felt like to be the one who had walked into something rather than the one who had built it. Megumi had spent his entire second lifetime building toward one specific goal, taming Mahoraga, the Shikigami that the first timeline Sukuna had used as a weapon against Gojo himself, now tamed by the person who had spent a lifetime building toward exactly this and adapted to Sukuna's very existence in the specific way that Mahoraga adapted to anything given enough time and enough exposure. Before the moment it was needed, a binding vow had been made. Nobara sacrificed as currency for a single use. Of a 200% amplification of Megumi's power, not because she was expendable, because she had chosen this specific sacrifice for this specific moment. The way certain people chose things, not because the choice was easy, but because the choice was theirs, and they were not willing to let it be made by anyone else. Megumi's domain had opened, lightning had struck, Mahoraga had been tamed, the first sorcerer to have done it in the history of everything that had tried and what had been tamed. By Sukuna in the first timeline, as a weapon against the living was now a weapon against Sukuna with a single slash. Sukuna was separated from Yuji's body, the king of curses. Stripped of the anchor that kept him in the world, was finally gone, not defeated, ended in the specific complete way that endings happened when the people working toward them had carried the knowledge of how for long enough and had built everything they needed before the moment arrived that required the building to be finished. Gojo was never sealed. Nanami came home from every mission. Haibara came home, Junpei, who had almost become something else entirely at the hands of someone who had found him first, became a sorcerer. The way the earliest frames of his story had always suggested he could if the story had gone differently. It went differently. 3 people who had already seen everything the Jujutsu world was capable of taking, made sure of it not through some grand declaration, not through the specific theater of heroism that stories sometimes required. Through the daily, unglamorous, specific work of people who knew what was coming and had decided that it was going to arrive at a different destination than the one the first timeline had built for it. They sat together, the 3 of them, in the specific quiet of an evening that was simply an evening without something coming without the clock that they had both been hearing since before they could walk, still running. Yuji looked at the 2 of them, at Megumi, who had built a plan before he could form words and had seen it through to the last detail, at Nobara, who had decided before she had even arrived that things were going to be different and had made herself into the person who could ensure that the deciding produced the outcome. The deciding required. He did not say anything for a long moment, neither did they, because some things were complete without being said, were in fact more complete for not being said, for simply being present in the space between 3 people who had carried everything forward into a world that was still standing because they had. The evening continued, the way evenings continued when the things that had been threatening to end them was finally ended, simply with the specific ordinary beauty of time passing without cost, for once without the specific cost that the first timeline had charged for every moment that had felt like this one.
Free is simply free.